Welcome to Face2Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face2Face. So my next guest is Cornelia Principe. She's the producer, or one of the producers on the new film Prey. That's Prey, P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y. This is a film that you're going to need to see. It's available on TVO. It's on iTunes. It's going to be available globally soon in the not-so-distant future. It's a film that won the Rogers Hot Docs Award, Audience Award for Best Doc in 2019, and I'm going to say it's a haunting, compelling, important, challenging, and yet hopeful film about a sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And it's as I said, it's a film that needs to be seen, and it's a story, and there are a series of stories that need to be told, and so look it up and listen in. Cornelia and I have a great conversation about the issues. We talk about the film. We talk about the specifics of it. We talk about this brotherhood and how is it that something like this can go on for such a long time. This notion of complicity and just not having the ability to push back, the guts to actually step in and say something and do something. More importantly, I mean, if our ideas and our thinking don't lead to action, then they're not all that significant. We talk about how change is, maybe going to come from within the church, but how there's going to have to be, external oversight. We talk about shared guilt and trauma, and we talk about consequences and responsibility, and how this story, probably couldn't have been told 20 years ago. We talk about empathy, and we wind up the interview by talking about sharing in someone else's pain, and this is something that comes up in the film and comes up in this whole story, and I mean, I would think that I'd like to think that Face2Face and my project has been trying to create this. I've talked about it before, but this idea of listening and empathizing with others, and so we wind up our interview there, talking about this idea of shared pain. Comes out in the film. That's kind of what this is all about, how to step into somebody else's shoes. So stay tuned. Coming right up, Cornelia Principe and talking about her new film, Prey, directed by Matt Gallagher. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and speaking. You can get a copy of Real Change is Incremental there. Order it through Amazon soon. I think you should. And if you'd like to get behind the work I'm doing on Face2Face, you can do that and support us financially through Patreon. Look us up there. And if you'd like to advertise or, there's a variety of ways of doing that, actually. If you've got ideas for guests, please reach out to me. We've got a newsletter. We're getting a lot of people visiting our site on a monthly basis. We're out there. We're well over 2.5 million downloads. And it's exciting, and it's growing. And we're going to be doing some live on-stage, live conversations in 2020. I'll be telling you more about that, so stay tuned for that and look for that. Sign up for the newsletter, share it with your friends and family. And if you can't do any of those things, if you could come on board and review the show, put something up there on iTunes, and hopefully it's going to be positive, but I'll leave that to you. But we really appreciate that. And then, of course, don't forget Face2Face also appears on rabble.ca for a whole host of other writers and thinkers and bloggers and podcasters there. News for the rest of us, that's rabble.ca. But right now, coming right up to talk about their award-winning film, Prey, that was at Hot Docs last year, Cornelia Principe coming right up. Stay tuned. Well, welcome to Face2Face. We're joined by a very special guest here with us today. Cornelia Principe is here to talk about a film that she's produced and been a huge part of called Prey, available on TVO here in Canada, iTunes in the US. We're going to talk about all of that stuff and a whole lot of, I would imagine, a whole lot of other stuff as well. So Cornelia, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, David. glad to be here.
So why don't we just step right in?
Yeah.
This film directed by Matt Gallagher won the Rogers Audience Award for Best
Correct.
Doc 2019. Must be pretty thrilled about that. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience at Hot Docs, and maybe you can roll into that a little bit of context around the film before we step into talking about some of the issues. But the film is Prey, and by the way, congratulations!
Thank you.
It's an important, compelling, and frankly troubling documentary on some levels. I can say that, and yet felt like you guys have really not only moved the conversation forward, but felt there were some victories, right? And some real pushback against this massive institution. So anyway, I'd love to hear some more about that, Cornelia, and tell us about the award and all that good stuff too.
Well, I mean, just getting into Hot Docs is always thrilling. And it was sort of like the cherry on top at finishing the film. We finished it literally days before its premiere. And interestingly enough, the day that it premiered at Hot Docs, April 26th, was the 1-year anniversary of the end of the trial that we documented. So there was sort of this kismic sort of connection between finishing the film and having it screened at Hot Docs before a live audience and having it be exactly 1 year to the day of when the trial was concluded. So we were just thrilled to be at Hot Docs, obviously. And we hadn't screened the film with a public at all because we literally just finished it days before.
Right.
So when the response that we got at screenings and being in a theater with people it was really powerful. It was really powerful that people were responding to it. So, and that happened at each screening. And so when we were looking like we were a very popular film with the audience, we kind of, that sort of reinforced that idea that we're actually, people are hearing it and people are feeling it.
You were onto something.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that you were saying it's a heavy film, and it is a heavy film. But one thing that struck us and what we felt too was that people actually came away feeling inspired by the film.
Right. And I think that's kind of what I meant. I mean, one of the last things I wrote, I'm just kind of scanning my notes here and looking at some of the highlights. One of the last things I wrote was victory.
Yeah.
Well, maybe small v, but
I know. And I think most people were surprised that that's how they would come away from the film. But to me, that was, in a sense, why we got the Audience Award, because I think people felt that this not only moved them, but also inspired them to maybe do something or to think about it or to talk about the issue or sort of feeling a sense of hope in a weird way,
Right.
Because you wouldn't expect that from a topic like this at all.
Well, tell us about that. I mean, it kind of, sort of implied in the title, Prey, and not Pray, by the way, folks, that for those of you who haven't seen it. So definitely look up the film and available through TVO, as mentioned earlier. We'll talk maybe a bit more about that. But tell us about the Basilian fathers. I mean, the line that near the beginning of the film, they knew and did nothing. I mean, for me, this is the oppressive and the speaking truth to power, that troubling portion. And many other stories. Yeah.
Well, one of the most haunting parts of the film for me was the video of the perpetrator, Father Hodgson Marshall, as he basically talks about his experience being a priest. And he readily admits to all the abuse he did. And he also basically lays out what the defense was, and I'm using air quotes, their defense, both the Basilians and the individuals, is that they didn't know any better, apparently. They thought this was a moral failing, and if they just went and they prayed and they confessed, that it would be better, that it would be okay. So it was shockingly naive. But also, I think that was just a way, that was a rationalization for what they were doing. I think a big part of it, obviously, is they didn't want to sully their name. So they didn't want it out there that all these priests were abusing. They had to hide it because what was most important is to protect the institution, protect the name, protect the brand, however terminology you want to use. And so they hid it. And
Silent for 55 years,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just Basilians is one community within the Catholic
Right.
Church, but I mean, it's replicated throughout the church, all the way across. For decades, this was going on, and most people hid it. If they knew about it, they just sort of sent the priest quietly away, either to another location, or to a respite for a month or two, and they would do some praying, and then they'd send them back. They just it's actually shocking. And I mean, we're hearing more and more about this across North America, and certainly across the world, that this was happening over and over again. And so the Basilians, I think, weren't doing anything different than any other religious community, frankly. They were protecting their brand, and they were protecting each other.
So mind-boggling when you put it that way. Protecting their brand is just so disturbing.
Yeah, I know.
On so many levels, for so many reasons, it seems to me.
I know. And the thing is that what kills me is I still find it hard to wrap around my head around the idea that these men, these priests, are supposed to be Jesus on the ground. They are supposed to be.
Cornelia, you should know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Yeah. Well, and also that they're supposed to be holy men.
Right.
Literally, they're supposed to be holy men. They're supposed to be better than the rest of us. They're supposed to be examples to follow. And the fact that what they were doing, that it just makes it all the worse. I mean, they were criminals.
They were criminals.
They were, wolves in sheep clothing.
Rob really seems to get a great deal of pleasure out of reminding everyone.
Yes.
Rob, the priest hunter, right?
Yes. The lawyer is on a mission for sure.
He is absolutely on a mission, and let's hope he's on a mission, from God. Let's hope he really is, because I mean, what's mind-boggling to me was near the beginning of the film, and I don't remember who. It was a report on the perpetrator, Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was anyway. And his great interest in boys, quote, makes him neglect his theological studies.
I know.
Like you can't write that in fictional perspective.
I know. There was just so many of those kind of moments where you think, oh my gosh, how could they, it was pretty unbelievable. But yeah, that's the truth.
So Rob says it's all about money for the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah, I think that's his theory. I think that's part of his theory. I think I'm not sure if I completely agree with it's all about money. I think protecting the brand is as important. Yeah. The two might be connected, but I think there's a certain that's an aspect. So the money thing I think is important, but to me, from my perspective, from what I've seen, I think probably protecting the brand and protecting each other. It's like a brotherhood, literally a brotherhood. Right. I think that is probably, in my opinion, equally an issue.
So I want to ask you about that protection and that brotherhood-like protection. Is it about the money for Rob? I mean, you bring, do. There's a really interesting editorial moment in the film, or a narrative moment in the film of the car being delivered,
Tesla.
Oh, stop so loud, right?
I know.
So, and he's a character, right?
Yeah, he's great. He is.
I interviewed Gabe Polsky this year for his film Red Penguins, and he's going to kill me. But the lawyer who's a part of the film, we really hit it off. I can't remember his name right off, but what a character. And, a movie should be made about this guy, We had so much fun and a great sense of humor. And I sort of felt the same way with Rob a little bit, but would you say he is on a mission? I mean, is it hopefully not just about the Tesla?
It's not just about the Tesla.
Yeah,
Absolutely not. I mean, the reason we had that in there is to show that, he's actually making a good living doing this. Right. But, and the money he's making is because there are so many perpetrators out there. Man. I mean, that's part of it.
That's the horrifying, right?
So, but I think that he is absolutely on a mission. I don't think you could do this work unless you were committed to it, because he hears and sees so much awful stuff. It's like being like a therapist, you can imagine, but not necessarily being trained to be one. So I think he's certainly on a mission. And he's making a good living at the same time. And I think he would probably, if he could, bankrupt them so that there was nothing, he would probably be fine with that, bankrupt the church. But no, I think, we also had to show that he's making a good living, that he's not doing it for free. He's certainly getting paid, and he's getting paid by the church, by the Basilians, by everybody. All those institutions that he's suing.
It's disturbing to me, to your point earlier about these holy men and the church and so on, and what it should represent prescriptively. And I would think what most, and I was so glad that you brought in, near the end of the film, I can't remember his name. Is it the father of the last
Father Restivo?
Restivo, thank you,
Maurice. Yeah.
That here was a human being. Here was a man who was really actually trying to connect, trying to heal, trying to say, how can I share? How can I help? How can I step into this? And I think one of the more profound moments in the film for me, and I think it's frankly a fear of all of us, but Rod says something about this, what this left with me, this PTSD-like traumatic thing that left with me was this overwhelming sense of feeling of not being worthy.
Yeah.
And I'm getting goosebumps right now as I think about that. And for me, that was the great leveler for me. I haven't been through this kind of traumatic abuse.
Yeah.
But boy, there's all kinds of time. Aren't we all just waiting to be found out as frauds on some level?
Yeah. It's such a profound statement to say. And I think, yes, I agree. We can all relate to it. But I think the victims of sexual abuse feel ultimately so hollowed out by that experience that they feel shame and sullied by it, and somehow therefore not worthy of love, not worthy of success. And that's a lifelong thing to struggle with, it's really heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and I know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I would imagine you've had many conversations with Rob about this, and even that glorious moment of walking out of the church when they, out of the courtroom near the end of the film, and wow, what a win, and look at them, and it all comes down to a number, and that's a massive sweeping generalization, because it isn't just about the number, and it's not just about the money, but it's kind of sad to me in a way that that's how they're measuring the success in cases like these, to some degree at least.
Yeah. Well, that's the system we have, civil suit is about money. There's a weird idea that you can actually put a number on the on the abuse. And there's another part of the film which for me is probably one of the thing that always gets me. I almost start to cry every time I see it, and that's when you see all the other victims and their portraits, and you see how much money they got. Right.
Yes, that montage sequence.
Yeah, and that as it was an edit that we realized this, putting a number to each of these, and the fact that they were all settled out of court, sort of reinforced this idea that there is this number value, but ultimately it's the number value is almost irrelevant, because you saw these kind of wild numbers all over the map from 28,000 to 950,000. And the suggestion was, I guess, if you had more money, you were abused for longer or something kind of crazy like that. It's not necessarily the case. But,
right, sure.
But yeah, the value of the money, that was something that when Matt started the research is what really attracted him to the story, this idea that they could actually quantify.
Oh, interesting.
Because the idea for, going back to the beginning of when we started making the film, Matt and I have been talking about making a film about clergy sex abuse for about 10 years now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Matt grew up Catholic. His parents are very devout Catholics and still are. In fact, his father was in the seminary for a couple of years before he left. Okay. Before he left to marry Matt's mom. And they had friends who were priests, and they were very involved in the church. And about 12 years ago, they started hearing about different priests, a priest that Matt knew, who were convicted of sexual abuse, and so everything started coming out, both around the world, but also more personally for Matt when he started hearing about particular people, and that's when he also heard about Patrick's story as a victim. So we were talking about this film for years and years, but Matt didn't know how to tell it and wasn't sure what angle. And it was sort of like, it seemed like everything was historical. And how do you tell the story in a fresh way to bring something new? Right. And then about 2 years ago, he thought, well, we were talking again about it. And he said, well, I'm going to call Patrick and just talk to Patrick and find out more about his story. Maybe there's something here that we can document. And he called Patrick and went down to Windsor, where Matt grew up, where Patrick also lives, and had a 3-hour coffee with him. And that's when Matt started hearing about the lawsuits. So the criminal cases, for the most part, at least with this particular priest and with Patrick, was behind them, but there were these civil suits that were still ongoing. And so at that point, Patrick said, well, you can meet my lawyer, Rob Talach. He's in London. And so Matt got on the phone, and within a week, Matt met Rob Talach and knew right away that this was an interesting angle that hadn't been explored. And Rob said, well, I actually happen to have this client who's actually looks like he wants to go to trial, and it's happening in 2 months. And so we thought, oh my God, there's a story. And we met with Rod, and Rod had a couple of days to think about whether he wanted to participate in the documentary, and then he said yes. And that's how it started. So within weeks of that initial phone call to Patrick, we were filming the documentary. So it all came to very quickly. Yeah.
It's amazing that it's the conversation that you guys have been having for so many years, and thinking about just finding the right way to approach it.
Yeah, it's a really heavy topic too, and it's not the kind of thing you sort of walk into without sort of really being ready. And I think that the way into this story with the civil suits gave it a framework where you could also deal with the heavier parts in a way that felt manageable, I guess, maybe.
Would you call Matt more of a filmmaker with respect to Prey, or a journalist?
Filmmaker, for sure.
Yeah. Because what's interesting about the film to me is there is a journalistic edge to it, from a sort of an investigative, I suppose, point of view, but not a 2020 kind of approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So stylistically, it's very different, and yet there's these layers that just keep getting peeled back, not just from a narrative perspective, but from factual, historical. This is important stuff. We need to know it, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just, and we talked earlier before the recording, before it hit the record button, and said something about documentary film there too. I think, right? It's just such a layered way to tell stories, and so many ways of stepping into something.
Yeah. And every project is different. And when you start out, you don't necessarily know how you're going to tell it. I mean, we were filming the court case, so all that verite scenes that you see, that was filmed before we did any interviews, really. I think Matt did one interview with Talach to record his opening, so we could use it just to get an idea of the style. But we had sort of all that. We had sort of like the narrative of the film in the can actually before we even got any money. It was sort of the quickest from beginning to end for any of our projects. Usually we take a long time to develop and find subjects.
Oh, by the way, can I just ask you an earlier question? I wanted to say, how did you get into hot dogs when you were still finishing off the film?
Still finishing the film. We sent a rough cut. Which we sent them a rough cut, and also we've also had quite a few films that this is our so together this was, I think, our fourth feature at Hot Docs, and we've also both independently had films at Hot Docs, so they knew us, and we said basically we're sending you a rough cut. It's not the finished film.
A couple days out, you're still
we were literally in the online, I think it was the Monday, and it screened on the Friday.
So back to your comment earlier about brotherhood and holy men and the unbelievable nature of this story. There's a line somebody, and I think it was the priest on trial, or I think it was Rob, who said this could have been stopped if anyone had any guts.
Yeah, that was the journalist. That was Mary Ormsby said that. Yeah,
Mary Ormsby.
Yeah.
That's what's most astounding to me. It's the Rosa Parks kind of moment. Somebody needs to move to the back of the bus at some point, and how come it took so long? And I think that's the question I think so many of us are asking when we read these stories. How come we haven't heard about this, sooner? And what other questions are raised as a result of this? So that's kind of a mind-boggling notion when you talk about things like brotherhood.
Yeah, I think there's also this element in an institution that there's not one person that has all the power. So there's this idea that, first of all, people don't want to stand out, but also it's a shared guilt. It's kind of like groupthink. And so there's not one person that takes responsibility, and so doesn't feel all the guilt. Do you know what I mean?
I think so.
Like if it's this idea that if there's a crowd of people and you're all watching something awful happening, it takes one person obviously to do something, and then everyone else follows. But if no one does anything, everyone feels like the other person's going to do it. They don't have to do it. So I think there's a lot of people just sort of turning their back, saying, "It's not my problem. I didn't do it. It's not, it's not my job to make a problem for the institution." So the brotherhood is also, in a way, becomes this collective way of sort of just no one's taking full responsibility. I guess is my point.
Which is, to me, the antithesis of what the church is supposed to be about what Christianity is supposed to be about, what Christ's message was supposed to be. The pushback, he was crucified, for heaven's sakes. How did that not come into your theological training?
I know.
This
and
just about raising bigger questions.
I know.
Ideological questions about what the hell is going on out there.
And the sad thing is, there's obviously a lot of good priests and a lot of good Catholics and good priests. People who we should look up to, and so these perpetrators have also brought down an entire institution that has some good parts. So it becomes everybody has been painted with the same brush. Now, when I see a priest walking down the street, you look twice. I wouldn't want my daughter being alone with that person. And that's so not only are the whole institution has been
well, I love
destroyed.
I don't know who it was at the end too, near the end of the film, who raised the notion of institutional complicity. I mean, that's the title of an essay. Right?
Yes,
should be written. That's the book that should be written. I mean, and many have been, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But how? Again, we're back to that question of the brotherhood, and if anyone had any guts, how does it become that complicit? How does group? And that's the bigger question, I think, for us all with respect. I mean, my work, international development, extreme poverty. How? Where is the political will? Where the complicity or child labor laws? How come we don't have better ones? These kinds of things. This generic willingness just to say, it's not my problem.
Yeah. And maybe a sense that what could you do anyway?
Right.
You can complain, and then it falls on deaf ears. There's that element.
So beautiful segue into the line about you'll never see the change come from within inside the church. Mm-hmm. Do you, having now, you've done tons of interviews, I would imagine, would and articles and Q&As and so on. And do you think that's true?
I think some change has to come within the church, but I think that change should be being open to an outside oversight to some extent. Certainly something simple like if someone comes forward with a complaint about a priest, the first thing that they should do is go to the police, not to the church hierarchy. There's no reason why if there's a complaint against a priest or a nun or whoever it is in the institution, they should go to the police. That's what the police are there for. It's a criminal act. It's not something you can deal with within the institution. So I think, in a sense, change has to come from within, but I think that change is about opening themselves up to transparency and to some oversight, certainly around any criminal acts for sure. So I think it's, I think that, and in fact, the Pope just recently, it was like 2 weeks ago, has actually, in fact, done that. He's now said that if before there was some sort of thing that cloaked bishops from not revealing people who had been accused of abuse. Now they've taken the Pope has said that doesn't exist anymore. If you hear about it, you have to go to the authorities.
Right.
So, I mean, that's I think a step in the right direction.
Sure. Yeah. So speaking of steps in the right direction, and I mean, is this like any great film, any great doc? It's layered and about so many things. For me, this is about choices and responsibility and freedom and all of that. And are you guys? I mean, and we talked about sort of that hopeful kind of conclusion almost. Yeah. People are feeling that sense of, oh wow, things are getting a little better.
Yeah.
Would you say that after the amount of time and effort and energy you guys and the research and all of that you put into these stories, these important stories? Where do you sit?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think that Rob, the lawyer who's really on the inside of this and still is, could answer it better than I. I mean, because I still feel like every time I open the paper, there's more stories. Right.
Was his line it was all about exposing the enablers?
Yeah.
Well,
Patrick says that too. So that's the other thing is that I think what a lot of survivors want is that those who covered up or didn't do anything, that they should also be responsible and they should be exposed or they should be excommunicated or there should be consequences, essentially.
Right.
So, I think it's a good thing that people are talking about it. This film probably couldn't have been made 20 years ago because, either most survivors at that point, weren't talking. But I think also even on the church's side, with the Basilians, for example, to Father Katowski's credit, he came on camera and he talked. And I think probably 2 years ago, he wouldn't have done that.
You added a response to the, what do you call it now legally, the appeal, and the question and the response. I mean, I sighed. I went, oh, come on, you got to be kidding me. The line of, I'm afraid I can't really answer that. When you even hear the legal counsel, which just made it that much stronger, by the way.
Yeah.
Having
that wasn't, and interesting enough, that wasn't legal counsel off camera. That was another priest.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was another Basilian.
Well, that just made it harsher. It made it more impersonal, anti-relational. Where's the human element? Where's the love in that? You know what I mean? Like,
I know.
You guys were supposed to love your neighbors.
I know. That was when we heard that they had appealed. It was pretty heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. But from Rod and Rob's perspective, they totally expected it, and that's kind of sad, that they expected it. Yeah.
Well, early on in the film too, one of the fathers, I think, said that the same guy, I think, actually talked about mediation not being successful in a lot of these cases, which again is also really unsettling, troubling, and disappointing on so many levels.
Well, mediation is. In the particular mediation with Rod's case wasn't successful because Rod ultimately didn't want to settle. That's why it wasn't successful. So they kept trying to give him more money.
It could have been had they come in with I guess I'm going to say a more gracious or generous offer approach, right? And that I guess that's right.
Well, with Rod, it was. I think if they had responded with love and kindness. Right off the top, instead of sort of legal and numbers. And I think Rod, right at the beginning, was put off by the attitude that he felt was coming from the other side, instead of a genuine sense of we're sorry this happened to you. We take responsibility. We hid him we allowed him to continue his abuse. I mean, that's what I think he really wanted to hear. And when he wasn't getting that, he thought, well, to hell with them. I don't care what kind of money they're going to throw at me. I'm going to go public.
Up.
Yeah.
Buckle up. Cornelia, we're probably going to wrap up in a couple minutes here,
okay.
and I really, really have appreciated your time today talking about the film and Pray and so on. I hope this is an okay way to sort of kind of wrap up the conversation for at least today anyway. And certainly, obviously, this is an ongoing conversation. And as I think Rod points out, this is about, as he's picketing outside the church at the end, this is about public awareness. This is about getting word on the street and asking better questions and going to the authorities and external committees and all these things.
Yeah.
Can you comment on this notion of sharing in somebody else's pain? I mean, I've worked in the development sector for years. I mean, I think that's part of it. It's about raising awareness about Indigenous issues here in Canada and about leveling that playing field. And it's going to take us a long time to get there. How do we do that? And I think that's what your film is about. I mean, you're what did Roger Ebert, Empathy Making Machines movies are, right? So that's, I hope that's what, I would imagine that's what you guys had in mind. So
I think you do it. I guess you do. I mean, every situation is different, but I think you do it sort of one person at a time. I mean, it's interesting because with Pray, for example, we have heard from survivors after seeing the film who have never talked about what happened to them and then start sharing their story either with us or with Rod. And these are people who have been buried it also for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and are starting to come out.
So it's giving people license.
It gives people license, and it also, they realize they're not alone.
Right, sure.
That there's no shame in what happened to them is really important because they have lived with shame for so long. The shame should not be with survivors. Shame should be with the institution, with the perpetrators, with the people who covered it up. And I think that's where if the film or us as filmmakers can say, hey, we want to hear your story. There's no shame in what happened to you, that to share it, we hope will help heal you. You don't have to share it. And I think just watching the film for a lot of people who are survivors, was an opportunity to open up a little bit, open their pain up a little bit.
I love this idea of one person at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, what I heard there too is this idea of, and I think if anyone ever looks back on my podcast and looks for some sort of thematic component, I hope it's this notion of how do we become better listeners, and I get that from this film, the story and from Rod, and we need to empathize. We need to step in other people's shoes, no matter who it is, and say, how can I share in that with you? And I mean, isn't that what's going to get us to a better world, a better place?
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, for me, my philosophy, especially with documentaries, but with everything, is that the way to change a person's mind is through their heart. So if you get people to feel, if you get people to open up in their hearts, their mind will follow. That's my feeling.
That's what, every day I look for a soundbite, and I think you just gave me the one I needed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit as we just wrap up here. Tell us where we can see the movie. Where can we access that if we're in the U.S. or Canada? And I think you said something earlier about global distribution.
Yeah, in Canada you can see it on TVO. It streams on TVO. It's also going to be airing on Knowledge Network in the next couple of months. I don't have a date yet, but soon. And then in the States, it's playing on iTunes and a bunch of other platforms, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but iTunes is the main one. So you can get it on iTunes. And then we just signed with an international distributor, and hopefully you'll see it everywhere else in the world sometime this year.
That's amazing. Well, that's fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. We've been talking with Cornelia Principe, the producer, one of the producers on the new film, Matt Gallagher's new film, Pray. You just heard where you can see it. Make sure you get out and see it. It's an important and compelling film, and I really do hope it goes global in every possible way, Cornelia.
Thank you, David.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.